All right, everybody. This is our first annual, hopefully, Sonoma County, and I called it a pre-harvest Zoom, but quite frankly, I think I missed the window on the pre-harvest part, and it is more of a harvest Zoom. But that's great. And we have an amazing group of people here to talk to you about an area as diverse as Sonoma County. We had to have a lot of people and a lot of incredibly talented people that are sharing some time where they could be either doing punch downs or pump overs or taking a nap, maybe, or dealing with children. So, thank you all for being here. I want to introduce kind of the group, and then we'll hear more from each of them in a minute. But Cleo Paulmeyer, tell everyone hello.
Hello.
So, thank you for being here today, Cleo. We appreciate it. You were kind of a last minute add in, and I'm thrilled that you're here. This is fantastic. Thanks. And then we've got Erica Stancliffe.
Hello.
Thank you as well, Erica. This is fun. And Murray, I had to do a little bit of nepotism here as well. So tell everyone hi.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon, evening for some of you.
Lise Azamad. Lise, where are you right now? At the office somewhere or at home?
Yeah, aloha folks. Lisa Azamon. I am tuning in from my office, my Foley Family Farms office at Chalk Hill.
Fantastic. Actually, yeah, Chalk Hill, we hadn't even really touched on what's happening there. So that's something maybe you can even mention as well. Morgan, are you down in Sonoma, the town of, or?
I'm in the town of Sonoma, yes, and I have the blind closed behind me, so I don't need to watch the interns try to drive the forklifts outside.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's trust
Earmuffs.
Yeah.
It's a trust exercise. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You know, one of the most disappointing things when I sold Siduri to Jackson family is they made us take, we had a beer holder on top of the forklift and they made us remove that. So that was really disappointing at the time. And Jesse, how are you? Jesse Katz, everyone.
Happy harvest, everyone. We're doing good. We're in it now.
Good, good. So we're going to start out and kind of go region by region and have one main person talk about each region, but we are very encouraging of people jumping in with their knowledge because, as often is the case, people are not just constrained to one area. But also, we'd love to hear from you all, consumers, utilizing the chat function. So if you have questions, if there's things you want to know, toss them in there. I'll be keeping an eye on that and would love to hear from each of you. And we're going to start out on the Sonoma coast. And with you, Cleo, tell us what I guess tell us a little bit about yourself to begin with and what you do and where you do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, talking about myself is really easy for my dad, a little less easy for me. So Wayfair is my continuation of my family's 40 years in wine, just about 40. My dad started Paulmeyer in 86. And but I always remember him saying over the years, every enophile eventually gravitates to the wines of Burgundy. And so for him, that was definitely true. And he planted 30 acres in Fort Ross Seaview, and that was in 2002. And for a while, we were bottling our Pinot Noir and Chardonnay under a Paulmeyer label. And I started working with my dad in 2008, totally entry level, answering phones, taking inventory. I did not drive forklifts though. And so as I got my footing in the business and it really became clear that Wayfair should be an estate label. We had this really amazing estate vineyard and we were blending the fruit with other regions and the great wines of the world, but especially the great Pinots of the world are from really specific sites. And so I started Wayfair in 2012 and now I continue to focus on that today with our amazing small team. So we are in Fort Ross Seaview. So I'm going to speak for all of the West Sonoma Coast, but for those of you that are not aware, the West Sonoma Coast is a newly approved AVA that has basically carved out the western portion of the Sonoma coast, which actually it's an AVA that goes as far inland as the Sonoma side of Carnero. So it really stretches really far inland. And a group of vintners got together and said, we need a better appellation to be able to label our wines and really represent who we are. And so our region includes Fort Ross Seaview, Annapolis, Freestone Occidental, Sebastopol Hills, Green Valley. And I know some of these regions are part of Russian River Valley, but they market with us. So we're all part of the West Sonoma Coast, either in AVA or in our marketing region. So
Cleo, let me ask you, one of the things I know a little bit about West Sonoma Coast is that while it is very far west, some of it is fairly high up a little bit. I mean, and some of it's very fog influenced. Some of it can be above the fog. Even in an area that has been carved down from the size of Sonoma Coast, it's still quite varied.
Exactly. So the whole region as a whole, it's cool climate. It has coastal influence, but the more northern regions, Annapolis and Fort Ross Seaview, we are high elevation and very close to the Pacific Ocean. So our cooling influence comes from that direct influence of that huge air conditioner in the Pacific Ocean. And so high elevation for us Seaview, all of the vineyards actually planted above 900 feet. So we're above the fog line, above where all the redwood forests are. And so that makes Fort Ross Seaview a little bit more unique because it's high elevation, but close to the coast. Some of the vineyards are as close as 2 miles, and Wayfarer, we're a little bit further inland, more about 4 miles from the Pacific. And then as you move further south, Freestone, Occidental, Sebastopol Hills, Green Valley, their coastal influence comes from being having that fog influence. They're a little lower elevation and a little bit more inland, but they're still a very cool portion of Sonoma County and get a lot more cooling from that direct fog influence. So this year for 2025, the vintage as far as timing for the West Sonoma Coast has been average or maybe just a touch later than average, maybe almost a week later. We had it's been a cool vintage, very cool, windy, particularly windy spring all the way through June. And then we had a really mild July and August. So we got a lot of nice flavor development in that time. During that time, Verizon definitely, one thing to note is Verizon took about 4 weeks this year. And usually, so it's a really long Verizon period. Usually it's closer to a 2-week period of time. We did get the Labor Day heat right on cue, but it definitely wasn't a heat wave like we've seen in the past. We still had cool diurnal shifts in the evenings. And so it wasn't there weren't high spikes. Wayfarer is one of the cooler vineyards, or happens to be, one of the warmer vineyards in the region. And we only hit like just 95 on a couple of days. So, some years, even being that close to the ocean, you can certainly get into the hundreds, but it wasn't like that this year. So, so a little bit so we got some heat then, and now we're back to the forecast is looking pretty mild. So there's also another thing to note is it has been a year with a lot of mildew pressure. So that has just created a lot of work in the vineyard. So, the most successful vineyards are going to have really, really detailed canopy management, and just takes a lot of work to manage that. But having a vintage like this, we're seeing it cool again. For us, it reminds us a lot of 2016, which is another classic cool vintage that got a little bit of heat around Labor Day. Todd, our winemaker, he and I have been working together for more than 10 years. He's been with Wayfarer for a long time, which I'm really proud of. We were talking today, and he was saying, this is kind of what he considers a winemaker vintage. And for him, that means a vintage where he gets to decide when we want to bring in the fruit versus when Mother Nature decides when we need to bring in the fruit. And so we're really excited to kind of get back into this cool period and really let the flavors develop on the vine. And cautiously optimistic that this is a year that's going to make some really balanced, some really ageable wines.
Do you have any feel as far as when you're going to be starting? Do you have anything on the books?
Yeah, well, we just happened to bring in a little bit of Napa Valley Chardonnay today. From my family has a vineyard in Napa. up on Atlas Peak. And so we brought that in today, but Monday is going to be our first pick for Wayfarer. And we're actually starting with Pinot. Usually the first day of harvest is usually Chardonnay and maybe also some Pinot on the first day. But this year, the Chardonnay still needs a little bit more time. And we're going to start with some Pinot Noir on Monday.
And obviously, it's kind of a guess until you get it actually in. But yields, how are they looking? I know where we make some of our wines last year. It was kind of surprising seeing some of the things coming in from the Sonoma Coast and Western Sonoma Coast that were higher than people anticipated. While you got further into the Russian River, the yields actually kind of went down, and it's normally seems like it's the other way around.
Yeah. In 2024, we had really big yields. I think it might have been our biggest harvest or one of the biggest harvests as far as yields from Wayfarer. So we're 30 acres and usually around average around 100 tons. So this year we're looking average to heavy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got that. How long does your harvest usually kind of stretch out? I mean, obviously it can go a long time if the weather allows it, I would think.
Yeah. No, I mean, so average is about 2 weeks. And that would be, that's definitely a fast pace, but comfortable. In vintages like this one might turn out to be, we could extend that to maybe 4 weeks, which is ideal because we can just bring things in when we're ready, as long as the weather conditions stay
Great
in our favor.
I just got something from Ted saying it's 99 in Dallas today. So we're fortunate. We were quite warm. I don't know. I mean, it still did get cool at night. Even during the Labor Day warm up that we had, it cooled down a good bit in the evenings, at least here in Windsor, it did.
Yeah, for sure. There was just one night in that last little heat spike where we had a one warm evening. So yes, we're seeing some basal leaves yellow and definitely good lignification. We don't do a ton of whole cluster, but in the right years we will. Just our personal preference. So this year definitely looks like it might be a year for more whole cluster.
Can I ask you a question? I was listening when you talk about harvesting for 3 or 4 weeks. As a novice, I mean, I would think all the grapes were the same, but I guess if the acreage is large enough, maybe it's not all the same, and that determines where you start picking first, as opposed to.
I can say maybe up to 4 weeks because we're only bringing in 100 tons. So there's other people on this call that I'm sure are thinking, "Wow, that sounds nice, only 4 weeks." Basically, you don't want to be compressed by, an impending heat wave or some sort of weather event, because then you're having to turn tanks. So have to drain a tank before it's ideal, before you want to. And so having a longer harvest period is nice because you can bring in the fruit. The fruit's just, it's fine on the vine until you're ready for it, is basically. Good. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just wondered if leaving, 2 more weeks, on the vines, does that more sugar, less sugar? Does that change the grape as opposed to the stuff you were picking when you started the harvest?
Not if the weather, and as somebody else, please jump in here, but not if the weather is,
I'm happy to assist, Cleo. Hey,
Yeah,
hey, Lisa Azamon. My day job, I'm a viticulturist and senior vice president of farming for Foley, so I'm also a winemaker for DOT. But I think, Steve, what you're thinking of is Cleo's area is really cool climate. The Sonoma Coast, the True Coast, is our coolest region in all of Sonoma County. And she's dealing with, probably in my opinion, my humble opinion as a viticulturist, one of the most challenging regions to grow grapes in, and one of the most challenging varieties as well, being Pinot Noir. And so her region, it's 100 acres, is that right? How many acres are you?
100 tons, 30 acres.
Tons. So she's tiny. She's 30 acres. That 30-acre piece that she's dealing with, when she starts out, the beginning bricks or level of ripeness is not homogeneous. It's all different.
Got it.
She's starting out, she's dealing with maybe 30 different levels of ripeness. And her team of experts, of farmers and winemakers, are all dealing with different levels of ripeness. And so they're sitting there and sampling and figuring out how are we going to kind of great differentiation. So for her to get to her for to have a, it's a difference between a 2 week and a 4 week harvest is a difference for her going from good to great on her wines, and she's trying to get that. For example, my day job for Foley, we are a 3.5 month harvest.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily having sugars change a lot in those last few days before you pick, but you are having flavors develop. And so anyway, so you're not necessarily alcohols aren't spiking and sugars aren't spiking because you're saying, we want to, ideally, this is ready, but we can pick it in the next 5 days or something like that.
Like a true city kid, I just thought you went out and you picked all the grapes in a couple hours and they're in and they're done. So great answers. Thank you.
Yeah, because each tank that when you have it in the winery is going to, I mean, depending on how you make wine, but we'll do about 5 days or so in a cold soak, and then it needs another week or two to ferment before you barrel it down and have that tank available again.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Cleo. Erica, let's move to you real quick and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then Petaluma Gap and also some Russian River Chardonnay you're going to talk about.
Yeah, so I'm Erica Stancliffe. I'm actually the winemaker for, I have to count sometimes because I took on a very small new client this year, but I make wine for 6 different people in Sonoma County. Most of my focus has been Petaluma Gap. So I was the president of the Petaluma Gap Wine Growers Alliance for 3 years and on the board for 5. We also, very similar to what Cleo was saying with West of the West, is we are also a very new AVA. We got signed into law back in 2017. And our portion of the Sonoma coast that we have carved out with the Petaluma Gap is not based on soil, not based on temperature or degree days, but it's based on wind. So that's why it's a very special, different AVA subsection of the Sonoma coast, because we start all the way out at the Pacific Ocean and actually end in the San Pablo Bay. So it's water to water, and the hills are actually running east to west as opposed to north to south. So that creates this really kind of cool, and if you ever look at a map of the Petaluma Gap, it actually looks like a boomerang almost. The wind and the fog come in from the Pacific Ocean, slam up against Sonoma Mountain. Part of that wind then funnels into Bennett Valley and into the Carneros region, and then the rest of it kind of funnels down through the rest of the Petaluma Gap out to San Pablo Bay. So for us, it's all about the wind. And we have done a ridiculous amount of study on the wind, and we are sitting usually at about 8 mile per hour consistent breeze with gusts up to 20 or 30. So for us, our big issue that we come with is because of that wind, how our farming has to change, because we, of course, have the fog and the moisture that comes in from the Pacific Ocean. But for higher elevations, a lot of times you'll see smaller yields in a lot of our Petaluma Gap with the higher elevation, especially in places like Gap's Crown, because you're getting so much wind influence slamming into the side of that mountain and hitting the canopy and hitting those clusters. So we are very indicative in the Petaluma Gap of small clusters, which I always call them like hand grenades because they just fit in your hand and they're tiny, and little berries that are like the size of the first digit of your pinky finger, which then translates to Petaluma Gap having not just beautiful acidity because of that coastal influence, but very intense color, very intense phenolics because there's so much skin to juice ratio when it comes to actual fermentation. And then for the Chardonnay, just like beautiful minerality and beautiful texture because of that thicker skin. And then for myself, I actually have 2 vineyards right now that I'm working with in the Petaluma Gap. One is very close out to the coast, kind of almost all the way to Two Rock off Chileno Valley Road in the middle of absolute nowhere. We have 40 acres planted to Riesling, Chardonnay, and Pinot, and we actually, not for ourselves, but we just harvested sparkling yesterday. So to give you an idea of the difference between sparkling and still, I mean, you have about a 2 to 3 week gap usually from your sparkling harvest to the start of your still wine harvest, just with the way that the sugar accumulates. Sparkling, they usually want 17, 18, maybe 19 bricks. And usually for me, I'm looking for somewhere in that 23 to 24 range on my Chardonnay and Pinot, but then our Riesling, we're picking at 22. And the Riesling was still bright green and not really through veraison when I walked it. So I have a very, very long time. And that's the other part of the Petaluma Gap is there's a massive, massive harvest window there. Because as Cleo was talking about with the flavor development, since it's not as hot there and there is that wind influence, which brings the fog in and cools it way down at night, what we see typically is that we have a much longer ripening window because the sugar is not accumulating in the grapes as fast as they would in a warmer region like Sonoma Valley, Russian River, Dry Creek, Alexander Valley, where there's more heat days and it doesn't cool down as quickly at night and the fog isn't there burning off at 11 o'clock in the morning. So I have a massive pick window in the Petaluma Gap to really focus on developing the flavors and watching the sugar accumulate and where the acid kind of levels out with that. And then on the flip side, which this one is actually kind of funny, which anyone who's worked with Petaluma Gap, you guys are probably going to go, what? I have another site in the Petaluma Gap, which is on the southwest facing slope of Sonoma Mountain, kind of overlooking East Adobe. It's at about 900-foot elevation, so it's right at / above the fog line. My Chardonnay was barely turning yellow. And that for me is super different because I'm used to some of that higher elevation ripening faster than the stuff closer to the coast. So that was a little mind-boggling for me. But the development, the way that the set has happened, the size of the berries, the size of the clusters, like it's all looking like a very good yield this year, maybe slightly above what I got last year in my Chardonnays. My Pinots all kind of look like the Petaluma Gap, small clusters and small berries, but the Chardonnay is like gangbusters this year. And I'm not sure if that is just the rain we got this harvest, or sorry, not this harvest. Sorry, I'm gonna knock on wood, everybody. The rain we got over the winter, and the nice kind of showers we had throughout the early spring and whatnot. So Petaluma Gap, been really happy. Higher elevations with all that wind. I don't have any disease pressure that I worry about. The stuff lower lying way out in Chileno Valley, we definitely saw some powdery mildew and we've been having to address it, open up some canopies and keep on top of,
Yeah, so I wanted to ask about that,
Yeah.
Eric, because it was because it was so cool and with the rains, it was a higher pressure mildew year for I think longer in the
Yeah.
season. And what people don't talk or a lot of consumers don't realize is in dealing with mildew. I mean, you do see it on the plant before you see it on the fruit usually, and
Totally.
it moves. So you have opportunities to address it, but it's something that requires an awful lot of diligence to stay on top of it.
Oh yeah. No, we've been going out there, myself, the vineyard manager, our estate manager, and this is at the Diodora property, which is off of Chileno Valley Road. And it hasn't hit the Riesling. It very minorly hit the Pinot, but it hit actually our younger, more susceptible vines. We had to regraft over some Chardonnay and kind of like replant, and then we just grafted over 2 years ago. So they're still, they're kind of developing, but those were hit really hard. And I think part of that was just that the way that property is, the fog and the moisture kind of suck in the middle. And it's also has this massive thread of adobe clay. So just it has nowhere to go. Like the soil can't absorb anything. There's really no wind. There's some hills right behind it. So it kind of just all that moisture sucks in. And we've been walking it for the last 2 months, kind of going, okay, yep, no, we're maybe gonna have a problem in here. And then now we're going through by hand and kind of cutting out anything that maybe took off a little bit in that whopping 88-degree heat we got out at the property last week.
Great.
But
And so then the other thing I wanted to bring up, and when we get to lease in just a little bit, I wanted to ask as well. But with this longer window and being a little behind, as you're talking about, or compared to some other areas, you have to pay a lot of attention to the weather later in the season. And I mean, there are hints of a little bit of moisture next week, but they're not really talking rain. They're talking just it's going to be drizzly and wet as we kind of catch the bottom edge of a Pacific Northwest front, and sometimes that can be challenging as much as a rain can be as well in some of these areas. So that's something obviously you have to pay a lot of attention to for a long period of time.
Literally the only saving grace in that situation is because we do have that consistent wind and the gusts that come through is if we are getting that Petaluma Gap wind tunnel coming through consistently, even with that moisture as it hangs over the vineyard, we see less damage than if we were in a space that had even maybe a little less humidity than what we had in Petaluma, but like no wind movement. So, because on the flip side, I have my first fruit for myself for stress vines is coming in on Saturday, and that's Russian River Chardonnay in much warmer area. Obviously, it's I would say 2 weeks ahead of my Petaluma Gap stuff, and same thing, it got a little bit of powdery mildew pressure, but also that vineyard is head trained Chardonnay, so you can't really open up the canopy too much unless you want to expose everything, unfortunately. But yeah, this year was, if you were paying attention and you were farming, you were walking your site, you were walking your vineyard, you were checking on the canopy, then while there was disease pressure, it wasn't going to affect you super negatively. Like it might be, oh, that sucks, but it's not a, oh no, what do I do now situation. Whereas the people who like walk out in the vineyard for the first time a week ago are like, what's that? And you're like, well, welcome to 2025.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So, Murray, you are kind of Russian River dominated. I mean, a little bit in Sonoma Coast, but even that is part in the Russian River. I think you're starting relatively soon. Tell us a little bit about yourself, everybody a little bit about yourself, and then what you're seeing out in vineyards.
Well, if you only think that I'm starting relatively soon, then you're not paying attention.
Well, yeah, I understand.
We need to talk over dinner tonight. But
yeah.
Yes, no, I am starting this Friday night. We'll be picking my Lakeview and Lakeview Vineyard, which is out in Green Valley of Russian River. It's the vineyard that I've been sourcing from since I first started making wine in 2021. So it's been a big vineyard for me to be able to learn from. Every year, Mother Nature is different, but then I also realize, the rootstock on this 115 is different than the rootstock on this 115. And Steve, just to kind of touch back on your question with Cleo, I have rows 1 through 20, and rows 1 through 11 are on Schwartzman rootstock, and rows 12 through 20 are on 10114. And there's a 3-degree Brix difference between those two, even though they're right next to each other. They get the same kind of treatment and everything. But so it really is important to understand your sections and of the vineyard and know how to treat them differently based off of what they're doing. So yeah, it's exciting. I have been growing every year since I started making wine. I'm actually in 5 different vineyards this year in 2025, when in 21 I started in Lakeview. And the majority are in that Russian River area, but I've also making some Cabernet in Sonoma Valley and then some Cabernet Franc in Alexander Valley this year. So definitely putting some miles on my car, driving around all of Sonoma County. But
so with Lakeview, tell them, I mean, like harvest dates, since you've had a few now different ones, where this one stands in comparison to others, and you can run through them, because Lakeview can be a little earlier site in Green Valley.
Yeah, my first 2 years, 21 and 22, they were both harvested at the end of August, the 30th and the 26th. And then this year, so it'll be the 6th when I harvest. And then in 23, that was my latest, and that was September 26th. So definitely, there's no formula. It's not, oh, it's around this time now, so we know we're going to be picking. It's very, Mother Nature is a creative woman, and so you just got to roll with, what you get. But one of the things that I think is interesting, though, is so with my Lakeview, it's Green Valley, and then I have another vineyard that's over in the Sebastopol Hills neighborhood of Russian River, and that one's generally 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so after Lakeview. But this year I'm getting Hallberg Ranch, and that is also in Green Valley, but it's dry farmed. And going through the Labor Day heat wave, my Lakeview, which is irrigated, jumped up about anywhere between the average brick and a half up to 3 bricks, 3.5 bricks on one of my sections. where Hallberg stayed in that average 1.5 brick increase. So thinking to me, it seemed opposite. I would have thought that the dry farm that isn't getting water would have struggled a little harder. But when I went out and sampled on Monday, those berries are still tight and fresh and gonna hang. And then now we have, some cooler weather coming up. So it's been a good learning experience for me to see these different vineyards that are so close to each other, but because of the way that they're farmed, they're not apples to apples at all.
And obviously, you had a good amount of rain this season, which maybe has helped the dry farm one not really have the challenges as well, but also deeper roots, I would guess too. I would think.
Yeah, and I've talked a lot with the vineyard manager and then the winemaker at Emeritus, who's been on that property for about 10 years now, and they're not surprised that that the vineyard's holding on well. They are, obviously still dry farming because they believe that that's what's been working best for the vineyard in drought years and also in better wet years.
Great. Well, thank
Yeah.
you, Murray. Lise, you cover a lot of ground with Foley. I mean, all over the place. And
So you get a serve jack on Airbnb.
so how does that
Now
work?
you can also get a serve.
Well, yeah. So Senior Vice President of Foley Family Farms, we farm about just around 5,000 acres from tip to tail. So we're Santa Barbara County to Walla Walla, Washington, but mostly kind of just Santa Barbara County to kind of Willamette Valley. But in Sonoma County, so I drive about 40,000 miles a year. It's a lot. I never know where my body is. But it works out pretty well. I do have a side gig. It's called Dot Wine. So I'm the viticulturist, winemaker, and co-founder of that as well. But we focus most of our operations are in Sonoma County and in Napa for the North Coast. And we started about a month ago. Actually, Dot Wine and Foley started about a month ago in Lodi, which was really exciting. And for Sonoma County, we started up on August 14th with some Pinot Gris out of Russian River Valley, out of the middle reach of the Russian River Valley, which was really exciting. And for Dot Wine, I started up yesterday with some middle reach rosé, Pinot Noir rosé, and white Pinot Noir. I make a white Pinot Noir as well, which was really exciting. I actually love to use Pomard clone. So what I love to say is I'm firing off on all guns I got, people, right now, which is great, and I love that. That's my favorite part about harvest, is when we all come together and we just we go at Mach speed. And then my other favorite part is when we get to take a nap.
Yeah, I was going to ask. It's got to be exhausting, obviously, and you start looking towards the end, and there are years where, like in 23, I'm sure it seems like it went on and on and on.
Yeah, it sure did. It sure did, Adam. It sure did for everybody on here. It really did. I'd love to see. I can't see Morgan's face, but I bet you he's also rolling his eyes permanently back of his head. So we're about anywhere from 7 to 10 days later starting than average for all of our growing regions and for Sonoma County, for both Dot Wine and for Foley Family Farms, for Foley Family Wines and Spirits. For 2023, we were, I mean, if we were on average 3 weeks late. And that was really challenging. But what people don't realize is, and this is for Steve, this is for you too. I'm looking at you right now, honey, in that box. Hi, Mr. Moses. When we start late, it's not like you can go late. When you start late, you compress your season because there's always a wolf out there. There's always a shark out there ready to grab you and nab you. Okay. Because and that shark at the end is the weather's going to get you at the end. So it compresses our season. So 2023 was so challenging as growers and as winemakers because we started late, but we couldn't end late. So really, it was kind of we were shoehorning what for Foley is usually about a 3.5 month process into 2 months. So that was really challenging. Where this year, starting out anywhere from 7 to 10 days late, I'll take that. We can do that. That's just fine.
And you're far enough in a little bit, I guess, at least with certain things, that you have an idea on how we're looking yield wise, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So we're looking. We are what I refer to, and please don't get upset with me and put this in the press Democrat right off the bat. And I love Moray's smile right now. And yeah, so guys, please protect me.
Mhm.
But we're average to below average. I'm going to set the net wide to protect my integrity, but we're average to below average right now. We've picked, I'm looking at a little screen off the side. So we picked Chardonnay, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, and Sauvignon Blanc, and as well as Sangiovese, and we are average to below average at this point in time. But remember as well, when you're at the beginning part of your harvest, where I'm 14.1% of my way harvest through a 26,000 ton harvest in 3 states. So when you're earlier in your harvest as well, you always pick the varieties. You're always picking what is lightest. Remember, so when you're talking to me right now, on September 4th, I'm going to be picking what's lighter. What I can tell you is qualitatively, however, I've seen since this entire growing season, we've been seeing physiological cues that are leading towards tremendous amounts of potential for quality. So we were seeing cane lignification or this sort of ripening of the canes, or the canes were getting woody prior to when we were seeing flavor development, prior to when we were seeing the berries turn color. And to me, as a viticulturist, this is my 30th harvest. My 30th harvest I'm heading into here. So basically, my career could possibly be married and have kids and buy a house right now. So yeah, yes, yes. Um, and it's after 30 years of doing this, when you see these physiological cues, such as cane lignification preceding your flavor development, and a commitment to seed ripening happening before we're getting a lot of your skins turning nicely, and before we're getting a lot of that flavor development in any variety that I work with, whether that's at Foley or whether it's Dot Wine, that's a really great harbinger for wine quality. So I'm super excited to see that.
One of the things, I mean, you were talking about, you can't really extend the season at the end. Some years maybe there's a chance to go a little longer, but not much. And then it brings up the specter of years like 2011, which I don't even want to go there too.
No, everyone knock on wood. Everybody, I can't see it. Everyone knock on wood right
Yeah.
now.
Because
Everyone,
there are years, I mean, it doesn't happen very often.
I'm a farmer, knock on wood.
Yeah,
Don't
it doesn't
do
happen in
it.
California very often. But the fact that you deal all the way up to Washington and all of that, you see different things in the Pacific Northwest sometimes.
I see things, Adam. Yes, I see things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And we have that
I see
little
dead
thing
people.
coming on the 9th and 10th of next week, and we see things. And the interesting thing is, I mean, yeah, it's tough. It's that wolf in the woods and that shark stalking you. I'm a surfer and a skier, so it's always one of those. But the weather's going to close you out whether you like it or not,
Is
and
that the
and that's the
temperature?
beauty of what we do. That's the beauty of our job.
Is that the temperature?
Is
If it goes too long, it gets too cold at night, and I mean, it's the
That's
take cold.
exactly, Mr. Moses. You are very astute. So
My
the
father is a mister. I'm not a mister. Thanks.
got it. Okay, so Sir Moses then. So the diurnal temperature.
Better.
There you are, Sir Moses. I like it. The diurnal temperature fluctuations are really what closes us down. People think it's winter. People think it's rain or storms or what have you, but it's that difference between day and night temps and that cold. It gets so cold for you at night and it basically shuts you down, and it's that commitment to senescence. Your vine shuts down and it says, hey, it's time for me to die, we're going to go. It's that signal. It's those hormones in our vines that shut us down.
Cool.
Great. Thank you. Oh, well, one other quick Sauvignon Blanc, and specifically, let's talk
Yes.
just briefly about that, because I mean,
So
the
pretty.
bright spot in the world of wine sales, for one thing, Sauvignon Blanc's doing very well. I know people who've actually bought Cabernet vineyards and replanted them to Sauvignon Blanc now. I mean, it's where are you on Sauvignon Blancs? It's kind of a rising star. How far into that are you? And
We are 13.1% of our way through Sauvignon Blanc. I have stats right in front of me. There you go. We're picking a little light on Sauvignon Blanc so far. Actually, sorry, I apologize. We are about 60% through our Sauvignon Blanc harvest, and we're 13% light. So we're looking a little light. We're looking a little light. And flavor-wise, it's so pretty. So super happy with it. Interesting thing with Sauvignon Blanc this year, we were seeing a little bit of waterberry. So waterberry is a function of stress. And you can have stress whether you're overcropped or whether you had a couple heat spikes or whether you're farming in a way that's going to stress out your vine. So you're not irrigating properly enough, you're overcropping again, or you're not necessarily paying attention to the nutritional status of that vine. So we're seeing a little bit, and so we might have gotten a little bit of heat, and we weren't careful with our canopy management. So we were seeing a little bit of that. Overall, though, it was less than 5%. Everything that we've picked looks really good from both the Foley and the Dot wine perspective. I've got my Dot Sauvignon Blanc in tank too. Super tropical, super pretty. So very happy with it.
Great. Thank you, Lise. Morgan, you are all over the place as well. I mean, in Sonoma County, but also Contra Costa. And where are you at the harvest point right now?
Yeah, whenever I hear Lise talk, all of a sudden I'm like, I have nothing I can possibly complain about. The Yeah, so we for Bedrock Wine Company, we specialize in old vine vineyards for the most part. We also make some Rhone, Sauvignon Blanc, other stuff. But yeah, we farm, about 240 acres across 5 counties, including Contra Costa County and Lodi, Napa, Sonoma. Um, and so it's yeah, so we sort of get to see the full gamut. So we just brought in our last fruit from Contra Costa County yesterday, which is Morved. And we brought in our Lodi Zinfandel uh, last Friday. It was actually, we had quite a bit of shatter out there, so that it cropped quite lightly. And now we're just getting into Sonoma Zinfandel on Saturday. And we're going to kind of like roll into that. But we've been in full Sauvignon Blanc land for the last 3 or 4 days, or like the last couple weeks. So, but yeah, we are 3.5 weeks into harvest at this point. So,
And
feels
what's the
like
Sauvignon Blanc looking like? And your thoughts on Zin? I mean, Sonoma, but elsewhere is also.
yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to see across the board. What we've seen is a really even growing season. It's been really wonderful to be a human, but that also means it's really wonderful to be a mildew spore as well, as people have talked about. So that has been one of the biggest challenges of the growing season. We farm most of our ranches certified organic, so we have a limited toolbox. So really getting in and doing the cultural work of getting canopies open, doing stuff like that has been really critical. Um, but by and large, we're seeing really wonderful, vibrant acids. And I think because of the mild growing season and the overall lack of stress, we're actually seeing pretty good sugar accumulation compared to like 2024, where we've got some really significant heat in the middle of July at a point where a lot of stuff was going into veraison. And I feel like that kind of stunted vines, stunned them a bit. And then obviously compared to 23, where we were all facing, harvesting things 3 to 4 weeks behind normal. This has actually been kind of wonderful. We're seeing really great flavor development and really vibrant, bright acids and low pHs, which really portends good things for color stabilization and tank, good aromatics, brightness. When you make Zinfandel like we do, we're always worried about overripeness, accumulation of alcohol. So, there's one vineyard that we work with, Old Hill Ranch, which my dad started working with back in 1980. So I've been going to since I was 5 years old. I was walking it last week and I was like, this has got to be like 24 bricks based on how it tastes. And it was 20 and a half. So it's just sort of like, just seeing that is always gets, us pretty excited on the winemaking side, because obviously you put in a lot of work on the growing side, and it's a bit more gratifying when it is a really good harvest and it's not like we're not looking like at a 22 heat dome coming our way or something like that.
Yeah, one thing about Zen, and I don't have, I mean, 1/100th of the experience or 1/1000th that you did, but I did do a little bit here or there. Was
Yeah.
how sampling was so important. Not that it's not important in everything, but the variance that can exist in Zinfandel and old vine vineyards, in part on because you may have other things interplanted, but also just within Zinfandel clusters. So, I mean, how do you, what is the procedure, and how does one make a picking decision with Zen in doing that?
You track sugars really closely. We start sampling sugars at about 17 bricks, and then we sample every 4 or 5 days. and we have pretty close sampling protocols that we follow. We also, for anybody who is sampling for us, like interns, we also we'll all sample everything together, and then we'll actually see which interns are maybe running hot, like pulling more ripe fruit than less ripe fruit. And so we can kind of like calibrate based on that. But honestly, like at some point, with Zinfandel in particular, and when you have a lot of mixed varieties, like at my ranch, we have 29 different interplanted varieties in the 1888 planted vines. There's no way we're going to just pick everything at a perfect 24 bricks. At some point, it's just a function of really knowing the vineyards and also really just seeing the vines. So, you walk your ranch enough, and then all of a sudden you get a little bit of heat, or you just are walking out there, and the leaves start to look a little different. They've churned, the fruit starts to soften ever so much, and then you're just like, that's the moment at which you just kind of pull it. So it's like we do all the scientific, we do we're as like precise as we possibly can. And then at the same point, I think this is kind of the magic of winemaking, because I think we all do it, irregardless of variety, but particularly with Zinfandel, at some point there's an element of gestalt. It's like you walk into the vineyard and you're like, it's right, and let's go. And that's and we're starting to see it. I would say the main thing that we're seeing in Sonoma County, which is a little different than normal, particularly given the fact that we've had significantly more heat accumulation in North Sonoma than we have compared to South Sonoma, is that typically we start up in Geyserville with our Nervo Ranch and then move it to Dry Creek Valley. And then at some point, like the mountain vineyards, like Monte Rosa Vineyard, where you have a big inversion layer so it stays warmer at night, those are usually the first vineyards that are in. For whatever the reason this year, our Sonoma Valley floor vineyards, Bedrock and Old Hill, are going to be the first ones in. So it'll be interesting as we get further in, whether that's a function of crop, whether that's a function of canopy, health, all of that stuff. Honestly, up on mountainsides where you have that diurnal variation and it's been warmer at night, mildew pressure has been off the hook. It's been so hard to keep up with that I do wonder that even like that might actually be slowing things down a little bit, even though people have been trying to stay on top of it. So it'll be interesting. So once again, I have my theories, and ask me in 3 weeks and I'll have completely different theories.
Yeah, exactly. And you still really won't know for sure, but you'll have something that might lead you. One of the things that I thought was fascinating that you said kind of at the end, and you talked about Gestalt, but the longer I have done this winemaking wise, the more as you get near the end of the season, the more it's the plant telling you when to pick than it is the fruit telling you when to pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, Lise was talking about, looking at these parameters of physiological ripeness within the plant itself, lignification of canes. A lot of us are seeing earlier dropping of basal leaves, so the bottom leaves on the canes than normal. All of these are sort of plant signals that they've moved along in the cycle a bit and are getting closer to senescence. And along with that comes fruit ripening. So a lot of it really does come down, a lot of it comes down to plant biology. We are looking at that. So at some point you just look at the same block, enough and over, and then at some point you go, nope, this is different. It's time to go.
Is there a max? I'm sorry, I mean, I keep hearing bricks, and is there a max bricks, or I mean, does it top out, or is it just?
I mean,
we've all topped out at numbers we don't want to talk about at some point.
It's a good question, but for let's say dessert wine, for let's say like Sauterne or Takai or something like that, you're probably at the high end getting up into bricks of 37 to 39. Where we're picking, which if you run the calculation, let me just do a quick one, 390 divided by.
So it's not 20 dehydration.
That's 23.7% potential alcohol if it were to ferment dry, but it wouldn't because it's so ripe. So typically what we're looking at is more like 23 to 25, which is more like 13.5 to 15%.
So I guess my question was, it's not 24 out of a max of 30. It's just wherever it gets to is.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Morgan. Thanks for all of that.
In a berry, and it's different in France and in Germany where they use oak shoal and stuff like that. So
Well, yeah, everything we get from France, it just turns around and they, here's what the potential alcohol is. We have our thing, a project in Lirac that we're now a couple of years into. And I mean, just to make everybody feel really good about how things are looking in Sonoma County on Sunday night in our vineyard in Lirac, we got just that night, we got a little over 4 inches of rain. So that yeah, we got it easy here, guys, so far at least. But Jesse, you're batting cleanup. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do. And I guess you're six, so cleanup is kind of an odd that number and cleanup don't go together. But tell us about what you do, and you do a lot of Sauvignon Blanc, but also some Bordeaux varietals.
Yeah, hey everyone, Jesse Katz, founder and winemaker of Aperture, and I own 3 other brands and consult for 7 from Napa, Sonoma, and a small little project in Willamette Valley. And we mostly focus on Bordeaux varietals, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and the white realm, and then all 5 of the red. And really kind of focused, let's focus on Sonoma right now, in these like little cooler pockets within Alexander Valley, a new AVA that we're trying to get through called Pocket Peak, which is up in the hills of Alexander Valley, and even started planting Cabernet Sauvignon in the Russian River back in 2019. That's now in full production. That's a really beautiful, unique profile of the varietal set. And I think we're sitting on an absolutely brilliant vintage. This is my 26th vintage altogether. And Aperture started in 09, but 26 as a intern winemaker and throughout my entire career. But with the amount of rain, it wasn't a crazy amount. It was about 50% of what we saw in 23 and 24, but it was still plenty of water to fill up the soils. So we had these beautiful, nice full canopies, very mild season. Obviously that brings some other complications with mildew and stuff, but also a lot of canopy work. So if you weren't on your canopy work, I think that was a key thing, especially making sure that you're not getting shading, enough light and exposure onto the fruit set, especially for me in the Cabernet and the Bordeaux realm. To make sure that you're not going to have too much pyrazines or any greenness coming out of there. So you need plenty of that. And then this very, like July was the coolest July we've seen since 2010. For those who've been making wine since then, was what I loved about the vintage, but a very, very cool vintage. We did have a huge heat spike that vintage as well. And then, since we've gotten into veraison, it's kind of gotten into back to a normal schedule with that little bit of heat over Labor Day, but in relative sense is very, very mild. And so I think we were really well set up for, we were seeing a lot of these precursors, the shoot lignification, seed ripening at much earlier stages, as if you're just looking at one ripening metric that often we talk about, Brix, aka sugar. But we look at a lot of different things when we're not just looking at Brix. We also measure every time we're looking at Brix as far as vineyard sampling, also size per berry, so gram per berry. So we can look at when we're actually getting sugar loading and when that kind of completes, and then when we start moving into dehydration after 24, 25, some varietals, Brix. Anything after that is no longer sugar loading. The vine is kind of done producing sugar. You're just starting to see dehydration. So we've really been cognizant about kind of finding these sites that give us these longer growing seasons. And especially when we're sitting on a vintage like this, gives us that ability to lengthen that season. And then we saw a really, really quick veraison window for Cabernet Sauvignon. It went through really quick because it's later than Pinot Noir and some of these other varietals. So when that heat came, we really kind of skyrocketed through, and we're seeing just, I think, echoing a lot of people, really incredible flavors at much lower Brix. 23 was a very cool season. We didn't have really the heat during that later portion that came back, and we started picking Cabernet Sauvignon at like 22.8 Brix. It was some of the earliest we've ever picked Cabernet. We're not going to be that far off this season. We'll start probably picking cab at low 23 Brix, just because the flavor's there, seed ripening's there, and that balance later on in winemaking will really be helpful, I think, in not having to balance out higher alcohols that some vintages like 22, when we had this incredible heat dome that caused an incredible amount of dehydration, we really had to balance out alcohols in vintages like that.
Jesse, with the veraison being fairly compact, I mean that also allows for some evenness in vineyards. I mean, so an ease of sampling in some ways, I guess, too.
Well, at ease, well, but you just have
Watching
to
and
nail that
blooming.
veraison pass. Because if you
Right.
miss that veraison pass, you might have, it's a very, we do on most vintages, hopefully it's only two passes. Sometimes it's third if we have a weather occurrence later on, but we'll do a destacking, de-winging, short shoot removal when just post set, and then we'll do another one right at veraison. And the veraison one went really, really quickly for Cabernet Sauvignon for us. And it's yields are very sporadic for cab. Our stuff in the Russian River probably set 10 tons per acre, and we dropped over half of it on the ground. Stuff up in the hills of Alexander Valley, we haven't picked a berry yet, but my guess is will be probably 10% lower yields. There was a bit of shatter up there. I don't honestly know the reason because during that flowering period, weather seemed pretty favorable. But we are seeing a bit of shatter up in the hills of Alexander Valley cab. It's also some of our oldest vines, and sometimes they're just a little cranky and just do that from vintage.
I'm sorry, what is shatter?
Shatter is so during vines are self-pollinating, and during that flowering process, often we see it with rain or cooler temperatures where not everything will pollinate, and you'll see clusters that aren't fully formed. There's on a Cabernet cluster, you can have about 400 flowers, about 120 of them usually set. Vintages like the extreme ones, like 2015, you'd have clusters that would have like 30 to 40 berries that would set on it. So you'd have these very loose clusters there. So shatter is a sense of the formation of that cluster.
Thank you.
And Jesse, you also make one of the premier Malbecs in the world, I would think, even. And Malbec is less important here in some ways in the quantity, at least, made in Sonoma County compared to other parts of the world as well. But how does Malbec differ from Cab, and what are you seeing with it right now?
Malbec to me is the most difficult of the Bordeaux reds to farm. Larger canopies, larger leaves, larger laterals, larger wings, and larger berries. So you really have to be meticulous when farming Malbec, which I think why people sometimes miss the boat on that. And what we're seeing in Malbec, reds are really compressed. Whites we're probably about 50, maybe 60% through our Sauvignon Blanc. Semillon, we brought in our first young block. We'll bring in a little Semillon, which is later than Sauvignon Blanc in general. We'll be wrapped up with Sauvignon Blanc, except for one ranch out in Bennett Valley that is usually 3 weeks behind. By the end of next week, I would say. Reds are not far behind that. So we'll start probably picking Malbec at the end of next week, which is pretty early. When we started this, looking at bud break or flowering dates, I thought we were a solid 7 to 10 days behind last year. We started 2 days after our first pick last year, and reds will probably be ahead of it. So it's really interesting to see how this vintage has really caught up quite quickly. And Malbec's looking amazing, like what we're seeing just in juice samples and stuff, really, really low pHs for that level of ripening. We have Malbec that's at our furthest along that we might bring in next week with this beautiful weather that we're having. We're at like 23 and a half right now, but pHs that are just crest 3 pH. We haven't broke down malate yet. We will do that once we process that. So probably a little bit higher malate that we have seen in the past, but low pHs with that level of concentration, we should have just very, very elegant wines with robust colors for our reds.
So,
question for
yeah.
Jesse. What is your and I guess to everyone too, what is your deciding factor? Because I mean, we've been sharing like, okay, the bricks are getting there, but the acid's not there yet. And but there's this and this, but the flavors, I mean, one thing that I've been trying to learn as a winemaker is trusting your gut, because I mean, it's not a formula. Every year is different. And so like, when do you actually decide to pull the trigger and pick? Is there a number, a flavor, a date?
Numbers are a little bit more particular for whites because you have nothing to really balance those out. And, acidity needs to be the forefront of that blend, in my opinion. And in balancing out higher alcohols too, you're not as flexible in that. Reds, you have a larger window, and style really leans into that. So depending on what style you're going for, that window could be much larger than whites. Whites, you really have to be cautious to not miss the window and have too high of bricks that either you're going to be diluting it back with adding water or so, which is pure dilution, unless you're doing it later on through reverse osmosis or spinning it down. Reds, if you do miss the mark or have a season, most vintages we try not to dilute anything whatsoever. But in a vintage like 22, and you are adding water back, you're adding it during the must, and it still has a time to kind of catch up and soak up and rehydrate some of those berries in a sense. So you really have to have a style in mind. What we look for in our reds is kind of where that flavor and getting to know sites. We have about 200 acres of estate vineyards right now across 3 AVAs just for Aperture. And then beyond that, I obviously have a lot of other vineyards that we just consult on or purchase fruit from. And so really getting to understand the site and that balance of acidity to tannin. I think that's kind of the key thing in understanding your style and where that program is going, what that wine's going. So it's not as easy as looking at, like, once you get to 24, 25 bricks, you can start looking at picking. There's a lot of other factors in my mind.
Sure. And I bet that's also kind of the same, like, I mean, for instance, with Clio, I mean, like this block does better with higher acid versus this block does better with more sugar and so it's really just,
and also knowing when a block's going to crash. Like we all know these blocks, maybe it's a rootstock, maybe it's a soil profile, maybe it's age of the vine, whatever it may be. Like, kind of when you get to that window, and if you're getting close, and after sugar loading in a berry, that vascular system from the vine to the berry really kind of shuts down. So if you get dehydration or something happens, you can't rehydrate that after that point. So knowing your site and looking at forecasts very, very closely and seeing how far, if we have this nice, calm, beautiful weather, maybe you can push that a little bit further. But if you see anything, we used to be concerned about rains. Now, to me, it's more about when the heat's going to come. And
higher.
That's what we're more concerned about, or I'm more concerned about.
Sure. Thanks.
So we've kind of come to the end, an hour in. We have had, I think, a fantastic discussion. It seems like Murray and I got in one last full round of golf over this past weekend because we had the chance. And it's kind of like, boy, we hit a good drive down the middle, and we've hit a very good second shot, and we're kind of on the green, and it can go incredibly well, or you can still 3-putt or 4-putt based on what's going to happen going forward. But we're in really good shape, it seems like, from what everybody seems to be saying right now, and set up for at least an extremely good vintage and maybe a truly, truly outstanding vintage. And with a lot of the things Lise was saying about things, it looks really, really positive at this point in time.
Jesse, I'm looking forward to trying Aperture. I started collecting Bordeaux 35 years ago when I lived back east. So when you said Bordeaux blend, my head picked up. So
please come by. We'd love to have you. Yeah, the Sonoma County is making some of the best Bordeaux varietals in the world right now, in my opinion. So
great.
It's a magical spot that we have here. And I think, to Adam's point, we are sitting on an absolutely brilliant, brilliant vintage, especially for the winemakers here who really know their vineyards. The biggest misses that I think people could have had this vintage is if they got concerned about lack of watering throughout the season, and so they decided to put water on when it wasn't not needed. And if they weren't looking at whether leaf water potential, sap flow, whatever it may be, the vine really didn't need much water. We dry farmed pretty much everything, young vines excluded, up until about 10% veraison. We have certain blocks that we dry farm every single vintage. But if you were able to get enough hydric stress pre-veraison, in particular for reds, I think we were sitting on one of the great vintages we've seen in a while.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. Well, we will endeavor to do a follow-up post-harvest sometime in November, either with this group or at least some of this group and some other things, so that we can sum it up. We've got a good beginning and middle part of the story, and let's just all bring it home, everybody. Thank you all for being here for the
happy harvest, everyone.
People. Yeah. Cheers. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, Adam.
Happy harvest.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Stop napping, Lise. Bye, more.